Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, as the name of the show, Current Issues, we will be speaking with the most current of all issues, which is the economy. United States is in economic crisis. We talked about this for the last 4 years. We did make this statement over 4 years ago, that we can destroy the world 10 times over with our military strength. But the war that we will lose was the economic war. If you had been watching this show in the last 5 or 6 years, you have heard us talking about this. And we told you that the economic war was on at that time. The dollar was being devaluated, and the economic war, ladies and gentlemen, is here. It's been here, but you did not want to know about it. What does it all mean to you? Your money in the bank, is it safe? What about your jobs? What about your future and your children's future? How severe is this economic crisis? John McCain thinks that our fundamentals are good. A day later, stock market crashes. Lehman Brothers go out of business. We're buying insurance companies, taxpayers. Is it the end of the free capital market? Is free capitalism? Is it over with? Do we live in a socialism system right now? The United States government had just bailed one of the largest insurers, the American Insurance Group, International Group, $85 billion. Before then, you've heard, we're not going to tell you all the news that you hear on mainstream news. What we're going to tell you is we're going to help you try to understand this tonight. Where did it come from? Where is it going? Bernstein, AIG, Freddie Mac, and Fannie Mae. And in the next couple of days you will hear of two big giants who will also fall victim to this economic crisis that we are witnessing. Is it a war, ladies and gentlemen? Are the people on top, politicians and economists, how could they miss something like this? Or did they know about it but they didn't tell us? We told you 4 years ago that along with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was also an economic war that we were fighting. And we told you that we cannot we cannot win this economic war. It is not like we won the other war, because we have not won that war either. But it is the economic war that we are losing, and we have lost. We're going to show you few clips that we put together to make you understand how money works, how banks work. We're going to show you what is happening in the country and what is happening in the world and who is doing it, as much as we can, or as much as we know. We're going to start with the basics of telling you how the banking industry works in this country. Let's go ahead and play the DVD, and of course we welcome your phone calls. When we come back, we're going to put the number on the screen. Call us with your comments or questions. We don't screen our calls, so give us your best shot. Let's go to the videotape.
For most, the question, where does money come from, brings to mind a picture of the mint, printing bills and stamping coins. Money, most of us believe, is created by the government. It's true, but only to a point. Those metal and paper symbols of value we usually think of as money are indeed produced by an agency of the federal government called the Mint. But the vast majority of money is not created by the Mint. It is created in huge amounts every day by private corporations known as banks. Most of us believe that banks lend out money that has been entrusted to them by depositors. Easy to picture, but not the truth. In fact, banks create the money they loan, not from the bank's own earnings, not from the money deposited, but directly from the borrower's promise to repay. The borrower's signature on the loan papers is an obligation to pay the bank the amount of the loan plus interest, or lose the house, the car, whatever asset was pledged as collateral. That's a big commitment from the borrower. What does the same signature require of the bank? The bank gets to conjure into existence the amount of the loan and just write it into the borrower's account. Sound far-fetched? Surely that can't be true. But it is. Privately created bank credit is legally convertible to government-issued fiat currency, the dollars, loonies, and pounds we habitually think of as money. Fiat currency is money created by government fiat or decree, and legal tender laws declare that citizens must accept this fiat money as payment for debt, or else the courts will not enforce the obligation. So now the question is, if governments and banks can both just create money, then how much money exists? In the past, the total amount of money in existence was limited to the actual physical quantities of whatever commodity was in use as money. For example, in order for new gold or silver money to be created, more gold or silver had to be found and dug out of the ground. In the present, money is literally created as debt. New money is created whenever anyone takes a loan from the bank. As a result, the total amount of money that can be created has only one real limit: the total level of debt. Governments place an additional statutory limit on the creation of new money by enforcing rules known as fractional reserve requirements. Essentially arbitrary, fractional reserve requirements vary from country to country and from time to time. In the past, it was common to require banks to have at least $1 worth of real gold in the vault to back $10 worth of debt money created. Today, reserve requirement ratios no longer apply to the ratio of new money to gold on deposit, but merely to the ratio of new debt money to existing debt money on deposit in the bank. Today, a bank's reserves consist of two things: the amount of government-issued cash or equivalent that the bank has deposited with the central bank, plus the amount of already existing debt money the bank has on deposit. To illustrate this in a simple way, let's imagine that a new bank has just started up and has no depositors yet. However, the bank's investors have made a reserve deposit of $1,111.12 of existing cash money at the central bank. The required reserve ratio is 9-to-1. Step 1. The door is open and the new bank welcomes its first loan customer. He needs $10,000 to buy a car. At the 9-to-1 reserve ratio, the new bank's reserve at the central bank, also known as high-powered money, allows it to legally conjure into existence 9 times that amount, or $10,000, on the basis of the borrower's pledge of debt. This $10,000 is not taken from anywhere. It's brand new money simply typed into the borrower's account as bank credit. The borrower then writes a check on that bank credit to buy the used car. Step 2. The seller then deposits this newly created $10,000 at her bank. Unlike the high-powered government money deposited at the central bank, This newly created credit money cannot be multiplied by the reserve ratio. Instead, it's divided by the reserve ratio. At a ratio of 9 to 1, a new loan of $9,000 can be created on the basis of the $10,000 deposit. Step 3. If that $9,000 is then deposited by a third party at the same bank that created it or at a different one, it becomes the legal basis for a third issue of bank credit, this time for the amount of $8,100. Like one of those Russian dolls, where each layer contains a slightly smaller doll inside, each new deposit contains the potential for a slightly smaller loan in an infinitely decreasing series. Now, if the loan money created is not deposited at the bank, the process stops. That's the unpredictable part of the money creation mechanism. But more likely, at every step, the new money will be deposited at a bank, and the reserve ratio process can repeat itself over and over until almost $100,000 of brand new money has been created within the banking system. All of this new money has been created entirely from debt, and the whole process has been legally authorized by the initial reserve deposit of just $1,111.12, which is still sitting untouched at the central bank. What's more, under this ingenious system, the books of each bank in the chain must show that the bank has 10% more on deposit than it has out on loan. This gives banks a very real incentive to seek deposits in order to be able to make loans, supporting the general but misleading impression that loans come out of deposits. Now, unless all the successive loans are deposited at the same bank, it cannot be said that any one bank got to multiply its initial high-powered money reserve almost 90 times by issuing bank credit out of nothing. However, the banking system is a closed loop. Bank credit created at one bank becomes a deposit in another, and vice versa. In a theoretical world of perfectly equal exchanges, the ultimate effect would be exactly the same as if the whole process took place within one bank. That is, the bank's initial central bank reserve of a little over $1,100 allows it to ultimately collect interest on up to $100,000 the bank never had.
The Federal Reserve System, to most people, seems like it is an agency of the federal government. That's what I thought it was when I first started to research this topic. But it turns out that it's nothing of the kind. The Federal Reserve is a hybrid organization. It's a partnership between the federal government and the private banks. When you look at it deeper than that, its essence is neither as a government agency or a private company. In reality, it is a cartel. In other words, it's no different in essence than a banana cartel or a sugar cartel or an oil cartel. It's a grouping of the large private corporations in the field, banking, who have come together to create agreement between themselves to limit competition, to preserve their profits, and to make sure that no newcomers come in and take away their position. That's what cartels are always designed to do. And it's a shocking thing to realize that something as prestigious as the Federal Reserve System, at its core, is nothing more or less than a banking cartel with exactly those same objectives. The Fed was formed not in Washington, D.C., not in the halls of Congress or some meeting room, but it was formed on a private island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island. This island in those days was a club called the Jekyll Island Club. And its members were a relatively small group of billionaires from New York, people like J.P. Morgan, William Rockefeller, and their business associates. When they went to the island, they all traveled aboard the private railroad car of Senator Nelson Aldrich. This was November of 1910, and he and 6 other men were told they mustn't be seen together, they couldn't dine together on that evening, and they must avoid newspaper reporters at all costs. One of them carried a shotgun. Just in case he had been confronted by a reporter, he was prepared to tell them that he was going on a duck hunting trip. When they got on board this railroad car, they were told not to address each other by last names, first names only. And two of them even went further, and they adopted code names. They were concerned that the identities of all of these 7 men might be known to the servants on board the car, and that the servants might talk about it. In that fashion, the word would get out. Even when they got to the island and went to the clubhouse, they had replaced all of the normal servants with new servants who didn't know any of these people. And they created the Federal Reserve under those kinds of conditions of great secrecy. I can assure you that very few wars of history have ever been plotted under conditions of greater secrecy than that. In those days, there was a great deal of concern among the American people about the concentration of financial power in the hands of a few very wealthy and powerful financial interests in Wall Street. They called this the money trust. And the cry in those days was to break the grip of the money trust. And one of the primary purposes of the Federal Reserve Act, as it was promoted to the American people, was just that, to break the grip of the money trust. They were going to write a law that was going to take the power away from these people and put it in the hands of their trustworthy politicians. Put it in the hands of the people through the electoral process. That was the propaganda behind the Federal Reserve System. So what's the purpose of the secrecy? It's because when you look at the list of these people who went, they were the money trust. They were the representatives of the banks, J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers. They represented Kuhn-Loeb and Company, Warburgs in Germany and the Netherlands, and the Rothschilds in England. This was the money trust, not only of the United States, but of the world. Had that fact been known, who these people were that were drafting the Federal Reserve System, the trick would have been exposed, and the public never would have adopted the Federal Reserve Act as, in fact, the Federal Reserve System.
Understand how we've been mired in debt and are staying there with the help of this fractional reserve banking. Washington needs to understand. Washington needs to understand that questions must be raised about why did we, in effect, give up our control of this asset, this ability to be able to issue money. Why did we give it to the Federal Reserve? We need to look at that again. It's not as though this country's, should be headed for bankruptcy or our people for destitution. The money's there. We need the will there to begin to look at America in a new way and look at our potential to create material wealth in a new way.
Seems like it is a agency of the federal government. That's what I thought it was when I first started to research this topic. But it turns out that it's nothing of the kind. The Federal Reserve is a hybrid organization. It's a partnership between the federal government and the private banks. When you look at it deeper than that, its essence is neither as a government agency or a private company. In reality, it is a cartel. In other words, it's no different in essence than a banana cartel or a sugar cartel or an oil cartel. It's a grouping of the large private corporations in the field, banking, who have come together to create agreement between themselves to limit competition, to preserve their profits, and to make sure that no newcomers come in and take away their position. That's what cartels are always designed to do. And it's a shocking thing to realize that something as prestigious as the Federal Reserve System, at its core, is nothing more or less than a banking cartel with exactly those same objectives. The Fed was formed not in Washington, D.C., not in the halls of Congress or some meeting room, but it was formed on a private island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island. This island in those days was a club called the Jekyll Island Club. And its members were a relatively small group of billionaires from New York, people like J.P. Morgan, William Rockefeller, and their business associates. When they went to the island, they all traveled aboard the private railroad car of Senator Nelson Aldrich. This was November of 1910, and he and 6 other men were told they mustn't be seen together, they couldn't dine together on that evening, and they must avoid newspaper reporters at all costs. One of them carried a shotgun. Just in case he had been confronted by a reporter, he was prepared to tell them that he was going on a duck hunting trip. When they got on board this railroad car, they were told not to address each other by last names, first names only. And 2 of them even went further, and they adopted code names. They were concerned that the identities of all of these 7 men might be known.
The creation of the Federal Reserve as being unconstitutional. It gave the government then the power to create legal tender out of thin air, that is, to create paper money. And although they didn't do that overnight, between 1913 and 1971, that is exactly what happened. But the notion of a central bank does not fit into the Constitution. The Congress has the authority to coin money, and only gold and silver should be legal tender. And this is an absolute contradiction of the Constitution to have a Federal Reserve System and a central bank. Not a lot of American people understand it, and I would add that probably not too many people here in Congress understand it either. I think they see it as a convenience, and I think a lot of other people see it as a convenience because they think they're protected by the type of system that we have. But a fiat monetary system or a paper money system is merely a system where the government has this power and authority to dictate and insist that a piece of paper is legal tender. And even members of the banking committee had to come up to me and they said, "You mean our dollar isn't backed by gold anymore?" Not realizing that the Federal Reserve really accommodates big government bureaucrats and politicians. When you think about the significance of the Federal Reserve Act being passed under those conditions, the American people didn't know, but it was banking interests that were behind it. Powerful banking interests because they wanted their assets protected. They wanted the Federal Reserve to be the lender of last resort. So if they had been loaning out and risking the money, these loans go bad, instead of having the market take care of this, they wanted bailed out. And this is why it was a tremendous popular thing to do for the banks and, of course, the big business people who were borrowing money. So it was very, very special interest directed, and it was designed for the elite. And even today, a lot of people don't quite understand that. So it's an educational job as well outside of Washington, but hopefully someday people here in Washington, especially the members of the banking committee, will gain some interest in this subject because people realize that the government's creating this money out of thin air, and you use the term loosely, printing, because they actually create credit, which is essentially the same as printing money. Most people realize, well, how can they do that? And most people know that counterfeiting is wrong and immoral and illegal. Well, here we have a system of money where we have permitted the politician, in collusion with the central bankers, to create unlimited amounts of money. Some weeks they create $30 billion in 1 week to accommodate this system. And Murray Rothbard in particular argued for the case for 100% gold coin standard, emphasizing the coinage of gold, which doesn't, a lot of people think, what does that mean, that to go to the store you have to carry heavy coins? No, but 100% gold coin standard means that if you carry certificates, they have to be 100% redeemable in gold. And this is what holds the government in check. If government tends to cheat and start printing too many certificates, then the people hold the government in check by turning in their certificates and say, we don't trust you, we want the gold. This is what happened in the 30s. And exactly what happened was that the government was called on it, and then what did the government do? They made the holding of gold illegal because it embarrassed the government, and they did it precisely to make government large. The Federal Reserve System introduced this notion that banks had to only hold a fraction of reserves in order to create credit. So that is another way where the government debases the currency. Not only do they print the money and create the credit, as it goes through the banking system, through fractional reserve banking, we further expand the supply of money, diluting the value of money, which is the inflation. The inflation isn't rising prices. The inflation is the government's program of increasing the supply of money, which devalues the currency, and that causes the prices to go up. There's a lot of examples where you have runaway inflation, prices are soaring, and the economy is in shambles. And that is what I fear will come to this country if we don't quit printing the money and creating credit, whether it's to fight wars that we shouldn't be fighting or to bail everybody out in this country that needs something. And that's the way this place operates. They sort of like it. You know, they like it because, you know, I don't have to raise taxes and somehow or another these bills get paid. Not understanding that when you dilute the value of money, it's really an immoral, deceitful tax on the people. But it will come to an end. If you study monetary history throughout thousands of years, you will find out that paper money has been tried many, many times, and it never succeeds. It always ends badly. The question is when will the dollar end badly? Will it be next year or 5 years or 10 years? I'm convinced it will end.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that was easy enough and simple enough for you to understand how things work in the money world. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is we have been printing money. We've talked about this on this program many times before, that the government just prints money that is not supported by anything, and the more they print, the less the value of the dollar in your pocket becomes. They just allowed $85 billion just today. And the Federal Reserve Bank decided to take that money, loan it to the government. Now remember, the government does not make money. The government spends money. Only you make money. The phrase make money, it only comes when you go to work to make money. You know, you say, I'm going to work for such and such so I can make money. You make money at jobs. You don't make money when you spend it. And you've seen how we've been spending money in the United States. How we've been creating money. You go to the bank, you take a loan for $10,000. We're not going to go through the fractional reserve banking, but out of that $10,000 that you took in a loan, $100,000 of money has been created out of nothing, out of thin air. $100,000. Just imagine the millions of people who go and take loans for much, much higher than that. And imagine the businesses that take loans, the banks that make loans, the economy, the trillions of dollars. The war that we have been fighting it with dollars that did not exist. And now, after the dollar has become the world currency, many countries are dependent on the American dollar to support their currencies. After the dollar had been accepted in the world as the best currency in the world, but yet we messed it up when we printed more money. The world needed more dollars, so we print more money. The world needed more dollars, we print more money. And the government is not the one that owns the money. It's the Federal Reserve Bank that was created by 13 Jewish families on Jekyll Island in 1910. The conspiracy was that people were getting upset because the money supply was controlled by few. And they wanted Congress to do something about it. So these people who control the money supply, they went to Jekyll Island and had a secret meeting and said, hey, you know what? Let's do this thing called the Federal Reserve Bank. And then we will sell it to the people as, this is your answer to that money trust that these families owned. So it's the same families that owned that money trust that the people did not want and wanted Congress to regulate. They went around and gave you the Federal Reserve Bank. On top of that, they made it legit. They legalized it in 1913 when actually the Congress of the United States have enacted the Federal Reserve Bank Act of 1913, which basically, instead of controlling the people who own the money and control the money, it gave them a free hand in not just owning the money, but also deciding how much money they can and they are to loan the United States government and United States citizens. They created money out of your hard work. When you go to work, when you sign that $10,000 loan, you actually created that money. You created the $10,000 that you signed because you promised, you signed a promissory note that you are going to make that money. Make that money, because that money was not there. You made it. You promised to make that money, the $10,000, and then everybody else, remember, that $10,000 became $100,000, so everybody else promised, and just think of the millions and millions and millions of money that was only on credit. If you did not pay that $10,000, that money is still there on the books. That $10,000 still there on the books as money that it existed, but it did not exist. It only existed because you were making those payments. You were going to work every day making money to pay those payments. The government now is bailing out all these people. So far, they have paid over $300 billion just in the last few months to bail out these financial institutions. The government is bankrupt. It does not have money. So where do they come up with $85 billion to bail out AIG from you? Because they signed to the Federal Reserve Bank that they are going to pay that money. The government doesn't have money. The government doesn't make money. The government spends money. You are the only one. You're going to have to pay that money back from taxes, whatever licenses, permits, whatever you make. That's going to go to pay for the $85 billion, the $200 billion, the $300 billion. The government has an infinite supply of money. It's not that they have the money, but they can tap into the Federal Reserve and say, we want money. So the Federal Reserve Bank says, how much? Because remember, the Federal Reserve Bank makes money on the money that the United States government issues or ask to be issued. Now that's the problem that we have. We have been taking loans, and every time we take loans, we create this illusion that money is there, and now the bubble burst. It's not about to burst, it burst, it's gone. Now how dangerous this thing? It's very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous, because we are a country that's living on credit. Now, with that formula, ladies and gentlemen, with these crises in the financial systems, it makes us vulnerable to our enemies. Our enemies are standing on solid ground. We're not. The war has made economic situations and conditions in the United States deteriorated so bad that we are barely standing. The water is up to here, and it's about to cover us. The enemies are standing on solid ground. Now, you haven't seen this analysis from the mainstream media, but I tell you one thing. I told you this before, and I'm going to tell it to you now. We can destroy the world 10 times over, but it's the economic war that we will lose, and we will lose miserably. We will lose miserably because we have people like George Bush in power, because we are talking about the party, the Republican Party, that got us into this mess, where the president-to-be if he's elected, John McCain, just a couple of days ago, thinks that the economic fundamentals are there. We're doing great. We're not doing great. John McCain doesn't know anything. He belongs to the same party that put us in this position. Let's go to the phones with Freedom. Freedom?
Yes, hello, Dr. Tillawi. You know what? For the last 4 or 5 years, you've been talking about this. Tom has been talking about it, and I've been speaking about it on my radio show, the Freedom
It's here.
Files.
It's here, Freedom. It's here.
When George Bush appointed Paulson from Goldman Sachs, I knew something was about to happen because you and I have been talking about subprime now for a while. I knew something was about to happen where they would socialize the risk while they privatize the profits. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, definitely.
We, the taxpayer, now is on the hook, just like you were saying, right now for $814 billion, almost $1 trillion. Plus, over the past week, the stock market fell 455 points. Yesterday, Tuesday, 504 points.
It's close to 900.
That's $1 trillion worth of equity out of the market. But who owns the property that equity represents? It's the Federal Reserve bankers.
Exactly.
Just like the Depression. You see what I'm saying? The people who had borrowed money for houses and whatnot, right? They lost all their house because they lost their jobs, correct? But somebody wound up with the assets. They wound up with the office buildings. They wound up with the golf courses. They wound up with... And the people who wound up with it are the same Federal Reserve, the Rothschilds, the Warburgs. That's who wound up with all the wealth, and that made them more wealthy when the Depression was over.
Sure.
So the American people has got to realize that George Bush, who's supposed to have a Master's of Business, MBA from Harvard, right? George Bush.
Well, let me tell you something about George Bush.
That's what they say. He's a master of business.
George Bush had bankrupted every company he ran and every country he ran.
But John McCain today called for Chris Cox, the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, to resign. I called for that about a month ago on my show for him to resign because he is not minding the store. He's not seeing that the securities are bogus and they are perpetrating a fraud on the American people. Just like those people who are selling short right now, they're trying to stop them from selling short. But for 9/11, when they bought short on the airlines, somebody made millions of dollars on those American airlines and whatnot that flew into those buildings.
You know,
so what is going on, Dr. Tillawi? Who is controlling all of this stuff that's bringing this nation down?
Well, the only people who make money are the people, the citizens, the normal, the average Joe out there. They're the only people who make money. And that money ends up being in the pockets of those bankers because they did not have money to give us to start with. They did not have money to give us to start with. We made that money. We lose that money in the stock market, not them. They are short selling. The big sharks out there, they are making the money. We are the ones that are scattered around, not knowing what to do.
I mean, people
don't know what to do right now, Freedom. People don't know what to do. Shall we leave our money in the bank? Shall we take them out of the stock market? Shall we go with gold? Shall we go with this? People are running, and that will add to this mess.
But Dr. Tillawi, the
panicking
voters right
will
now,
add.
the voters right now are about to vote for a man, John McCain, if you could believe it, who said that he don't understand the economy.
Look.
And he has Phil Gramm working for him, who caused what you presently see because his legislation that President Clinton signed back in 1998, 1999, that effectively got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act that had the wall between investment banking and commercial banking.
Sure. I mean, Phil Gramm is the one. Phil Gramm is the one that orchestrated the Enron disaster.
But Dr. Tillawi, how can you and I just sitting here as a television talk show host and a radio talk show host understand the economy, and a presidential candidate, 72 years old, said he don't understand the economy? What is the American people going to do?
Well, I'll tell you what. If the American people elect John, if they elect John McCain, they will add to the disaster that we are in. John McCain is not, and this has nothing to do with politics. This has nothing to do with politics at all. I'm not saying that Barack Obama is the answer either, but John McCain is not. We know for sure that John McCain is not. John McCain wants to do more war. We don't have money. The economy is gone. We don't have money to go to war with. It takes money to go to war. And if this man wants to drag the United States, just like his partner, George Bush, dragged the United States for 8 years, this is why we are suffering what we are suffering right now.
Okay, I want to ask you one other question. Paulson was the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and he made hundreds of millions of dollars, as you know. Now, there seems to be a Jewish conspiracy here to either bring the United States down to its feet and own it, because once all this stuff happened, because AIG about to go under, Morgan Stanley may go under tomorrow or whatever, they're talking about it now. So if all these big investment banks go down that are currently owned by Jews, is there some kind of war going on between the Goldman Sachs, between the Morgan Stanleys, and between the fractional banking system of the Federal Reserve? Something is going on, Dr. Tillawi.
I'll tell you what. Now, you just now put your finger on a very important issue that I debated before the show. Should I get into it or not? Because people may not understand what the heck we're talking about. But I have considered the fact that there is a war going on at the top. There is a war going on at the top, and there's another war going on. Listen, if somebody, now we made a lot of enemies. The United States made a lot of enemies in the world. It's not just the Muslims. We made the Russians the enemies. We made the Iranians. We made the Venezuelans. All these people have a lot of money, and they can play the money game.
But Dr. Tillawi, how could this have come about right after the Bilderbergs met in Virginia just, 2 months ago, 8 weeks ago? Well, we discussed that. I knew something was coming from that meeting. I knew something revolutionary was coming from that meeting to socialize the risk and for the wealthy to capitalize on the profits. I knew something was coming.
Well, now you have to understand, the Bilderbergers is not a uniformed group, and it's a group from all over the world.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. You know, you get the Russians in there, you get the Chinese in there, you get all these people in there who may not like what the United States is doing, and if these people had an argument up on top, we suffer down here. So what you are getting at, Freedom, is extremely important. Nobody is covering this. No one in the mainstream media is talking about this at all. But I think that we do have a war, an economic war going on that is related to what we are doing in the world, what we are doing in Afghanistan, what we are doing in Iraq, what we are doing in Russia, what we are doing all over the world. It is catching up with us right now because it's also a war. An economic war is a war. Bring your enemy down to his knees financially, you conquer him.
Now, may I ask you a question? Sarah Palin was interviewed by Charles
Gibson
on ABC News, and when they showed pictures of her in her office several weeks ago, she had them little
Israeli
Jewish
flag.
those Israeli flags. So, do you think that AIPAC has something to do with John McCain's decision to pick Sarah Palin?
Oh, of course.
Since she was saying that we got to back Israel, we got to back Israel. Please explain it, and I'm going to get off the phone, okay?
Thanks. I'm glad you asked that question. Sarah Palin is a very dangerous person for the United States. She is a fundamentalist. She is an extremist. She is a John Hagee. Just a little bit prettier. This woman is very dangerous because in what she believes in. Her beliefs. This woman thinks she's an Israeli. This woman thinks she is a Jew. This woman thinks that she's going to rapture. This woman believes in Armageddon. This woman, if John McCain is elected and this woman is his vice president, you will be looking at another Cheney. Little dumber. This woman doesn't know anything. This woman came from a town of 5,000 people. The media keeps saying 9,000 people. No. There are 8,000 people now. When she was a mayor, there were 5,000 people. A woman who does not know anything. And they probably told her, you don't need to know anything. And you've heard her many times saying, well, if they tell me what the vice president does, I might take a look at it. Well, now she is proficient in what a vice president does. This was just 2 months ago that she didn't know what in the world a vice president does. This woman is very dangerous, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not here to say vote for Obama. I'm not. But I can tell you one thing. I'm here to tell you, do not vote for John McCain. You don't want to vote for Obama? Vote for somebody else. Vote for Barr. Vote for Nader. Vote for Ron Paul. The only man who was running, who knew all this stuff. He understands, and that's why he is where he is, because he understands the Federal Reserve Bank. He understands that we gave our constitutional right of issuing money, of controlling the economy, we gave it to private institutions, private families who control everything. That's what we have done as a country. And now we wonder, you know, what did you do about the information we gave you 4 years ago when we told you that the economic war is going to be the only war we cannot win? It's not that we are winning the other war either. But this, the economic war, you know, this is the statement. I made it twice already. I'm going to make it again. We can destroy the world 10 times over. We have the nuclear weapons to do it. But the economic war, ladies and gentlemen, because of the system of economics that we have, because of the way we loved the fact that everybody in the world accepts our dollars. So we started just printing dollars without having anything to support it. We depended on the good faith and credit of you, not the United States government. See, that's what it says, good faith and credit of the United States government. No. It's the good faith and credit of the United States people. That's what the dollar was, because you worked hard to make that money. You worked hard. Remember, the only money that will be, the only real money that will be created is the money you make. That's why you say, I'm going to work to make money. That's the only way you make money. You make money by working, by trade. That's how you do it. And I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, it is extremely dangerous when the government starts bailing out private companies. It becomes socialism. It becomes communism. Before you know it, you will have a checkpoint at every corner, because you will not be trusted by the government, because you are not going to like it. And when you don't like it, you're going to get out there in the streets and say, I don't like it. When you do that, they will be there to shut you up. This is what I'm telling it to you now, because 4 years from now I'm going to say, I told you so. It is true. We're coming to you, we're coming to the world from Lafayette, Louisiana, a small town in the state of Louisiana, but we have been right on with everything we have told you from the beginning, before the mainstream media even mentioned it. Where was the mainstream media when we were telling you the war we will lose is the economic war? You've got to do something about it. You've got to do something about the Federal Reserve Bank. Tell the federal government to abolish the Federal Reserve Bank. Sure, it's going to be hard on us, but let's make it hard on us and make it easy on our children. Make it easy on the future generations that they have to inherit this mess that you enjoyed. You enjoyed the lifestyle that you enjoyed with money that you did not have, with money that the country did not have, but you got that money that did not even exist. Now it's time to pay. Now is reality. Now that big balloon, it's gone. Now it's just the little reality that we still have. We always said, what can you do about it? Call your congressman, do this, do that. But how many of you did? How many of you did? How many of you even remember that we told you in this show that the economic war is the problem? The economic war is the one we're going to lose. It's here. It's here. And we lost it. The disasters that you are going to see in the United States, forget about the Depression. That Great Depression, forget about it. It's going to be worse. There's a lot more of us. There's over 300 million of us right now. The resources of the country depleted. No credit from the outside world because they don't believe in the dollar anymore. The devaluation of the dollar that we told you about 4 years ago. Since the war started until now, 1/3 of the value of the dollar was lost. If you had $100,000 in the bank, and we told you this example before, since 2003 until now, that $100,000 is worth $67,000. By the time this year ends, I want to be optimistic and say it will be worth $50,000. The money you make now, even though you're making more money than you did 5 years ago, it is not getting you anywhere of what you were getting 5 years ago. The war is here. I don't think we can do much about it. We just have to accept it and move on. Start with real jobs, real work. Bring those companies back. American companies that went outside of the country and now they are shipping their products here. That hurt us, and it hurts us a lot. It hurts us a lot. Because that money, whatever the products they're making, it is not our product. It's made by another country. When we bring it in, it's an import, not an export. Go look up. The most successful economies are the economies that export, not the economies that import. All you have to do is go to your local supermarket or your local Walmart or whatever and see where the products that are in that store, most of it made outside the country. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like the economic topic will be with us for a while, so we will continue monitoring what is going on. We'll bring you the good news, the bad news, and the ugly news. And we will be here with you. As long as we can pay for the light bill, we will be here. And we will tell you what's going on in the world. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday. Go do the right thing for the last time. Good night.
The views and opinions expressed in the previous program are strictly those of the segment producer and do not reflect the views of Acadiana Open Channel, its staff, board of directors, the City of Lafayette, or Cox Communication.